autre moment. Maintenant, c'est enregistré. Votre microphone, s'il vous plaît, gardez votre microphone coupé lors de la discussion et la conversation entre Marie-Claire et Katia. Si vous souhaitez participer à la fin, il y aura une période questions-réponses et on vous encourage de participer, soit avec la fonction chat, il y a un petit bouton en dessous de votre écran, ou sinon, vous pouvez utiliser la fonction dans les réactions lever la main ou tout simplement lever la main, la vraie main comme ça, et quand c'est à vous de parler, votre microphone sera activé. Et tous ceux qui participent à la période questions-réponses auront la chance de gagner une sélection de livres à la fin de l'événement, incluant une copie de Songs for Angel. Si jamais vous éprouvez des difficultés, quoi que ce soit avec Zoom, n'hésitez pas d'envoyer un message directement à notre autre, ma collègue Diana. Yeah, in terms of Zoom housekeeping, as I was saying, I think we're all pretty used to Zoom at this stage of the pandemic. I invite you to turn your camera on during the call. It's great to see your faces. Although we'd ask if you're on a cell phone or an iPad not to move around too much, just because that can be a bit distracting. This conference is being recorded for people who weren't able to join us this evening so that we can je vois un petit message de Marie Craven. Je crois que le raise hand, si je ne me trompe pas, c'est dans les réactions, mais si jamais, vous pouvez simplement lever la vraie main comme ça et vous aurez la chance de participer. D'une manière ou l'autre. Yeah, so as I was saying, if you want to participate in the Q&A, either put your real hand up or in the reactions at the bottom, there should be a raise hand button. Or you can also type your question in the chat. And for everyone who participates in the question and answer period, you're eligible to win a gift of books at the end of the call, including a copy of Songs for Angel. If you're ever having issues with Zoom for whatever reason, don't hesitate to send a direct message to our host, Deanna. I'd like to take a minute to express thanks to my fellow Holiday Book Fair team members who helped organize this great event tonight, our partners, the Quebec Writers Federation, the Violet Hour, Paragraph Bookstore, and the Literary Translators Association of Canada. Our sponsors, Penguin Random House, Babar Books, and the Montreal Gazette, as well as our funders, the Department of Canadian Heritage, Canada Council for the Arts, and SODEC. C'est maintenant avec grand plaisir que je présente écrivaine, éditrice et traductrice Katia Grubisic, qui a été publiée au Canada et à l'extérieur. Son recueil de poésie What If Red Ran Out était finaliste au prix de poésie A.M. Klein de la Quebec Writers Federation et lui a valu le prix Gerald Lampert. Katia has been guest faculty in the creative writing department at Bishop's University, part-time creative faculty at Concordia University, and has taught in CEGEPS and for the Quebec Writers Federation. She was coordinator of the Atwater Poetry Project reading series and has been a frequent guest editor for the New Quarterly and was editor-in-chief at ARC Poetry magazine. She was founding editor of the Ice House Poetry imprint at Goose Lane Editions and associate editor with Linda Leaf Publishing. She is also frequently solicited as a member of literary and grant juries on consultative bodies and as a book reviewer. Ses traductions comprennent White Out de Martine Delvaux, Little Girl Gazelle de Stéphane Martelly, et l'objet évidemment de notre discussion ce soir est Songs for Angel de Marie-Claire Blais. Sa traduction du premier roman de David Clerson, Brothers, et de A Cemetery for Bees d'Alina Dumitrescu ont été finalistes au prix du gouverneur général. So, Katia, over to you.
Merci. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, first of all, to the LAQ, Rebecca, Diana, and Elise, for all your work organizing this. Et à vous tous et à toutes de vous joindre à nous ce soir. If you want to type into the chat where you're from, this is one of the last remaining pleasures of the pandemic, is to find out who can tune in from the ends of the earth. So feel free to participate as if we were really just hanging out in a bookstore, having a chat. with one of Quebec's great lights of the 20th and 21st century. So as Rebecca mentioned, we'll have some time for questions and answers throughout the evening, sort of towards the end, but feel free to also submit them as they occur to you, and we'll keep a running tab of questions, so we'll be able to address them at that point in the evening. I'm going to begin by introducing Marie-Claire. C'est des questions en français ou en anglais, on peut les gérer dans les deux aussi. Et évidemment, Marie-Claire et moi, on va probablement aller de l'un à l'autre aussi, d'une langue à l'autre, parce que c'est, après tout, c'est Montréal, quoi. On va vivre ça comme on le fait habituellement. But I want to begin by introducing Marie-Claire Blais. I'm sure she needs no introduction at all for most of you, in fact. And I know that many writers of my generation really cut our avant-garde teeth on her work. And it's a huge honor and a pleasure to be able to host one of Quebec's real literary luminaries here this evening for a rare English interview, and a rare interview also that will be available to a number of people all over the place. I'm hoping that it'll be an interesting, wide-ranging conversation. And I'm very much looking forward to chatting with you, Marie-Claire. So for those of you who perhaps have just fallen onto earth tonight, the novelist, playwright, and poet Marie-Claire Blais has been an important figure on the French literary scene for more than 35 years, and actually probably a few more years than that as well. Her first novel was La Belle Bête. It was published in 1959, and it's since become a standard of Quebec classrooms everywhere. Since then, she's published also about 20 novels in Quebec and in France, all of them translated into English by a number of other translators who've come before me, and whose work have given her many voices, and the polyphony of her work, that many more voices into English as well. So I acknowledge their work and their mental accompaniment tonight. She's also published 7 plays, 4 collections of poems. She wrote a screenplay called Journal en images froides, and contributed to the script of the documentary Tu as crié, Let Me Go by the director Anne-Claire Poirier. Excuse me. Some of her novels have been adapted for film and television, and she's won, I think, almost every major award in the West and for the French language, and in Canada certainly, including the Prix Médicis. She was honored with the Order of Canada, the Ordre National du Québec, and she's also made a Chevalier des Arts et des Lettres de France. She's also rarely one of the members of the Académie Royale de Langue et Littérature Française de Belgique, and making her, in fact, the first Quebec author to be inducted into any European Literary Academy. So I say she needs no introduction. However, I'm hoping that we get to introduce ourselves all to you this evening, Marie-Claire, and to know you a bit better as a writer in English also. So welcome.
Welcome, Katia. Thank you.
I'd like to begin by speaking about Songs for Angels, since that is your most recent publication in English. It just came out this summer. It's been out for about 4 years in French already. And the English translation, I think, has brought a number of different issues into the light, because when the book was written, it was at a certain period in American politics and in American catastrophes, if I can put it that way, and also in global events. And the English language translation came out at a time when those issues are equally pertinent, but in a different way. And so I wonder, the novel is so wide-ranging that it's almost reductive to ask you to summarize it, but I wonder if you could tell our audience a little bit more about Songs for Angel, about this 9th novel in the Soifs series.
It is in the Soifs series, and first of all, I have to congratulate you for your work, because it's a beautiful translation, very bright, very clear, very transparent, and I really was very moved to read it. I think it's hard to resume it, and it's part of all the 11 books on Soif. In English, it is translated by Madame Fishman, Sheila Fishman, by These Festive Nights. And that's the first work, but it is always close to These Festive Nights, in the sense that it is the same life, the same story, but everlasting. I mean, we go through our time in an island, and our people live, our people survive, all kind of crisis that we know, refugee crisis, self-destruction, and cruelty by young men who burn a black church. Everything, these events are very, very close to us. Even if it is, the book was written something like 5 years ago, yes.
It's very much of its time. I think it remains of its time 5 years ago or today, and we hope that it's not any more prescient than it needs to be. In the States these days, we have a sense that history precedes and repeats and echoes itself in the most tragic ways. And here as well, to some extent. The book was actually published in Quebec in French the same week, I believe, as the mosque shooting in your hometown of Quebec City, if I'm not mistaken. Je me demande aussi, vous avez dit une fois que dans une autre entrevue, I'll quote this in French, I'll try to translate it, but this is almost 40 years ago. Donc, après 40 ans, une entrevue, vous avez dit, l'écrivain est le visionnaire des autres, le visionnaire de son temps, le témoin de son temps. This is many years and many books later. So in an interview about 30 years ago, Marie-Claire said something to the effect of, the writer is the visionary of their time, the visionary of others around them, and a witness of that time as well. And I wonder if you still feel that this many years ago, and this many books afterwards, do you still see the writer as having a kind of role of bearing witness to current events, to other people, to?
Absolutely, absolutely. He's a visionary. He has the memory to take everything in, because what we have as a tendency as human beings is to forget. It's not to have any memory. We don't want to remember the Second War. We don't want to remember Nagasaki. We don't want to remember anything, because we are in our future, which is natural. But as a writer, it's very different. You have a kind of very, as you know, a very old memory of everything. Even if you were not there, the history is heavy on your shoulders. And I think it's the case of many writers too. And for Soifs, these festive nights, it begins by an happy life in a paradise island. But in this paradise, this is our universe. It's very beautiful, our universe, but we destroy it. So that's the slow motion destruction coming in. But it's also the joy of life, the need to be sensuals, the need to be loved. It's also all that.
And that's carried forward. I think there's some links a little bit. The gun, the Chekhov's gun that is on the wall in the first act has to go off in the second. And I feel like there are these moments throughout the Soif novels where something happens and then the thread is picked up 2 or 3 novels later. Sometimes a character that reappears, and it's something like 200 characters, I think, in across all 10 books. I'm thinking even of May in Songs for Angel. There's a sanctuary for marine animals, and there's this turtle that they rehabilitate. And so there are moments of also deep hope, I think. And so is that I guess what makes the bearing witness to difficulties is maybe made palatable by also bearing witness to moments of joy, of sensuality, of love? Is that?
Yes, as you say, there is also deep hope, and there is also deep love, and there is also deep courage. I mean, there are always some people to save the refugees. There is always some people to think of the other's pain. There is always someone to take care, but in the same time, it's very frayed. The equilibrium of love and hate, as we see it now, is very frayed.
Do writers have kind of a social responsibility for that balance, or are they the keepers of that balance to some extent? Do you feel that you need to represent equal parts bleakness and hope? Do you feel like you owe your readers or perhaps your characters that sense of equilibrium?
You and I, we are human beings, we are human writers, so we go through negative periods as we go through very high positive periods. So we know what the other people feel. We know how frail people are, and we know how sensitive they could be and victimized easily, particularly the youth.
and actually throughout the Soifs series, and maybe especially in Songs for Angels, because the angel, the character, for those of you who haven't read it yet, and I deeply encourage you to. It's an incredible book. He's a young man who is dying, and who dies at the beginning, who dies as a novel opens, basically, and the novel unfolds as there is a procession towards his final goodbye, towards the commemorative ceremony for this kid, really, Angel, who shouldn't be dead, as no child ever really should be. There's other characters too that have a sense of lost innocence. I'm thinking, for example, there's the children who've lost their father in 9/11. There's children who are conscripted as suicide bombers. A 12-year-old girl who's escaping from the marketplace she was supposed to blow herself up in. There's children who are endlessly victimized by the clergy, and then they're re-victimized as the cardinals are kind of keeping the silence and the complicity of that silence. And among all of those children who embody that kind of tainted innocence, there's of course the figure of the young man. So the young man is also not much more than a child himself, who is a white supremacist and who takes it upon himself to enact a tragic massacre in a Black church, which is reminiscent, of course, of an event that happened not long before you were probably writing this book, in Charleston. He's presented as virginal, as pure, as he's always worried about his hair and his face, and is he going to be tainted, basically. But I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that aspect of the innocence lost, of innocence regained, and of whether, in fact, is the young man at all innocent? Do we all have a propensity for evil, or the capacity perhaps for evil, or is there something that broke him? Is there something that, I'm not asking you to pronounce yourself on mass shooters, but I wonder, in the case of these characters, do we start out clean, or do we start out with the possibility of perpetrating horrible acts?
Yes, the question is there, is it in you when you are born, or but in this case, in the case of the young man, he was brought up with very good parents. Even the parents are surprised. He's not. He's very close to our young men today, or go and kill 3 people in the streets. If he doesn't have a conscience that killing is a crime, and also it's just Black people for him, and he's even if his parents are very, very good, he goes to a school of white supremacists, and that's where he learned his trade. And that's the way it works. They go to school, they go to a school of violence, and they kill. They learn how to kill. So he doesn't feel anything. He doesn't feel remorse. He doesn't feel. He just feels that he's a little prince of the cause, the cause of the supremacist.
I read somewhere that when you were writing Soifs, you often went to actually interview individuals, not as a writer, not introducing yourself as a writer, but really just to get their stories one-on-one, to sort of feel out what their manifestations might become as characters in the book, and then perhaps told them afterwards, I'm not sure if they were friends or if they were acquaintances, and I wonder, in terms of the young man, or maybe some of the other characters in the book, were there real stories that fed those characters? I mean, there's no shortage, unfortunately, of mass shooting or racial supremacy, unfortunately, in the States right now, but were there real people whose witness you literally individually bore in any cases?
Yes, the young man exists. We saw him on TV with his beautiful hair and looking 16 years old. Now it must be 21 or 22, but he's still in jail. But which is so astonishing when I see him on TV, this young man, he never say he has a remorse. He never say it was sad, it was bad, or anything. We don't know what's going on in his conscience, because we don't know about anyone's conscience. But it is very, very scary.
So if he's the flag bearer of hatred, then, and of kind of like, I mean, he's kind of psychotic or sociopathic, certainly. Who do you see as the flag bearers of hope in the novel? Which are the characters that you see as being his antithesis in some way.
Well, the other characters of the book are hopeful, mostly. I mean, even Angel is a victim of AIDS because he's 12 years old, and he must have been he received some bad blood or something during a sickness, but he's innocent. It is a pure angel because. But which I think is hopeful in all these books is there is always music, and when Angel goes to the beach for the last time with his dog, there is a chorus of Black people behind him who sing for him. The same chorus is there when he died. It is the story of an angel, but victimized, but in the same time, he gives a lot of love. So he doesn't leave this earth without motivation. He leaves this earth with love and passion, and everybody think of him. And he tries to unite people.
There's also a really beautiful, playful moment when they're talking about Angel, and it's in the past tense, unfortunately, already, and they're imagining him traveling among the planets and being a sort of astronaut, as children of that age would be wont to do. And there's some lovely moments of actual lightness in the book that are funny, that are silly, and I'm thinking of other characters. Robbie is like this as well. They're chummy. There's a sense of almost not comedy, but not slapstick, but lightheartedness that's really welcome. Or the character of Brilliant, who is brilliant, who is such a light for others.
Yes, there are lighter characters around him, but they are there also to bring him joy. And the lady who at the beginning of the book who takes everybody complains that he's too heavy. He has been so light in life, but when he's dead, he's so heavy. Everybody is complaining about that. But in the same time, there is joy as to have known him. It's a loss. It's a terrible loss. We cannot say otherwise. But in the same time, he represents all the children who die of AIDS in Africa.
A pandemic that's not over yet either. Although there's two children in the book who are then saved, right? One is actually cured and returned to his grandparents, I believe. So yes. There are these moments of limited and tentative joy also at the end of that terrible epidemic that we're still living through. I want to talk as well about a couple of characters that I found that exist in very small capsules, and that's the suicide bomber and then Susanna. So Susanna is a girl who is, maybe you can tell us a little bit about Susanna. She's a girl in the States who's victimized by her father, essentially.
Yes, they are brave people who should die, but they will not die. Angels should not die either. But I mean, it is also the story of we bring a lot of victims in our tribulations and wars and conflict. And AIDS was a war, as our pandemic is a war. And we lose a lot of people. But we have always a new generation and new hopes and new, in the case of Robbie, for example, he's always joyful. As you say, it's a fantasist character, but he's happy. He's happy in his life. And many people are happy in their lives, in life, in real life, and in my books.
The war metaphor is apt for Robbie as well, and for many of his friends who go to who combat regularly, who are in protests and who are very much in the activist movement for trans rights. And so there's a sense of the struggle there as well, I think.
It's a great struggle, and they are all involved with this struggle, and they are all militants in their ways, each one in its different way. Some in doing some theater and explaining the phenomenon of rejection. The others, like Robbie, traveled to San Francisco. But the evocation of Angel is also the evocation of everything that went wrong in the 80s and how we didn't care.
In terms of the AIDS epidemic, you mean? Or
Yeah.
No. I got the sense that this is kind of a deviation from the book, but definitely in the early days of this current COVID pandemic, I think so many people who lost people in the AIDS epidemic, especially in the early days when there was such an unbridled sense of fear and nobody knew what was going on, that nothing had been learned at all. There was something kind of exhausting about that. And I wonder, when you were writing about the AIDS epidemic now in the end of Soifs and Des Chants pour Angel, did you have a sense how did you remember those early years of the 80s and people? I mean, I remember I was in the dance world at that time, and just everybody was dying.
Yes, we lost the most beautiful artists and writers, and it was terrible because we put that death bound to a sin, the sin to be oneself, the sin to be gay, and that was terrible. And that was terrible to be an African, unhappy with this epidemic of AIDS, because they were completely innocent. It was a terrible thing.
Are there certain voices that feel more like they're yours in this book? I know that Daniel is often, so the Daniel character, again, for those who are about to read the book in the audience, is the central writer that exists throughout all of the novels. And he strikes me almost as a puppeteer, right? He's the one who is not often emotionally inflected himself, or he goes through great tragedy with his son who's estranged from him. At a certain point, he has no shortage of loss in his own life, but you get the sense that he's the puppet master a little bit. And so I wonder if there's a character in particular, either in Songs for Angel or in any other of the other novels, that you feel that who is really your voice or your pen in this world that you've created, in these worlds that you juggle.
It's always there's always a little bit of us, but a little bit. But he's inspired by a friend, and his sons too are inspired by a friend. But as a writer, he's always trying to be over the drama that he tells himself in his writing, because it is the way he writes.
And which he consciously tries to extricate himself from. I mean, there's moments in the book where he feels like he has to, he's done writing a scene with the young man, and he creates the young man, and then he has to get him out of his head somehow. And and the challenge then as a writer is you have to take off the character at the end of the day, right?
It made him sick to write that. He explained that it made him sick. And he said, how could these things happen? And he's very upset because he's a rich young man, but he has a heart. And his grandmother used the family to open the house. So they have Cuban, Asian refugees in the house. They have all kinds of people. And it's a kind of, it is the way he writes, it's in seeing people one after the other, and in being in a kind of passion about people.
And I think we see that legacy in May a little bit at the end. And then in the final book, when she's really coming of age in the so far untranslated Une Réunion près de la mer. I feel like May, Danielle's daughter in the book, is very much she's the continuation of that benevolence and of that openness and of that sort of endless heart that the grandmother embodied for Danielle.
Yes, you're right. And she's also the daughter of her mother. I mean, she's very feminist, and she wants justice, and she's very upset as a child. And the reconciliation between the mother and the daughter is a bit slow, because May is more advanced than her mother.
Is that necessarily the way it is? I think that do our children always outpace us or
No, but they may feel that. And they may feel that profoundly. And I love Melanie. I think she's our mother. I think she's doing her best, really, with our boys and with Vincent, who's always asthmatic, and she's divided. She's one of these women who is kind of divided between family and career and duties. And that's why I admire her. Finally, she's on the side of her daughter.
And she evolves constantly as well. From there's a point at which the child, I think it's May, says, "Oh, Mom, you said this to us. You said you're kind of everybody is responsible for everybody else in the world, in light of taking in just the refugees." And the mother sort of says, Melanie says, "I said that." And it's funny that you give this to children and they take it in the moment, and yet you evolve then beyond that as a person and as a parent, and you don't even remember having inculcated that lesson in your children.
She finds it hard. She finds it hard to follow her spirit. And I think she finds it hard to follow me, because she sees the future and she's very worried for the future. There is that too.
I wonder if I could read a passage, actually. I'm going to read both the French and the English, the passage that involves actually Susanna, because it's a moment of great horror and tragedy. So Susanna is to give the audience some context, is a young girl who is shamed by her father for presumably having sexted with boys, or even not even sexted, but sort of exchanged, bikini pics or something like this. And so her father shames her and cuts her, and really cuts her hair and puts the video of that shame on YouTube, presumably on YouTube or online, to kind of expand the shame. And Susanna then, and we get the sense that the father is habitually brutal in this way, and that the mother can do nothing about it. And so Susanna runs away and runs out onto the highway. And the moment at which she runs, it's I'm getting sort of, my hair is standing up on my arms as I'm even telling this, but it's also a moment where we see that angelic aspect again. We see the aspect of having no life wasted. So I'm going to read a small section in French, Marie-Claire, with your permission, then I'll read the English as well.
Please.
Oui, pensait Susanna, nous pourrions partir ensemble ailleurs. L'univers est si immense. Maman à la broussaille blonde, cette main de mon père qu'il passe dans ses cheveux. Ne le craint-elle pas autant que moi? Elle disait, c'est ton père, il faut l'écouter, lui obéir. Cette main d'une violence brute, de mon père, oui. Et n'était-ce pas elle, sa mère, qui courait le long de l'autoroute, transpirant dans la poussière? Maman, maman, criait Susanna. Si tu ne viens pas, je devrais rouler là, sous les roues, tant j'ai honte, maman. Maman, toujours tourbillonnait le papillon aux ailes jaunes et bruns. Attends, criait une voix de femme, attends. Nous allons oublier ces vidéos. Tant de méchanceté. Attends, Susanna. Ne vois-tu pas que je viens vers toi? Nous partirons ailleurs. Assez de cette maison où mes enfants sont brimés, persécutés. Non, je n'en peux plus, je voulais te le dire plus tôt, mais il y avait toujours cet effroi près de lui, qu'il nous priva de tout, toi et tes frères et sœurs. Oui, était sa mère à l'horizon? Viendrait-elle, pensait Susanna. Ah, viendrait-elle? Tant d'animaux, petites choses sans appartenance, oiseaux, lapins, écureuils, venus des forêts saccagées, sacrifiés sur les autoroutes. Susanna irait vers ce cercueil de fourrure et d'eau cassée. Elle s'y mélangerait sans que personne le sût, pensait-elle, car toute honte s'effaçait sous le bleu du ciel. Qui se souviendrait d'elle si sa mère ne venait pas? And I'll read the corresponding English in my translation then from Songs for Angel. Isn't this imposing, an inexpressible indignity on them? Sorry, I'll start again. Isn't this imposing an inexpressible indignity on them? And Susanna thought, if her mother came, yes, we could go somewhere else together, the wide world. Does my mother fear him? My mother with her blonde hair. My father runs his hand through it. Does she fear him as much as I do? She says he's your father. You have to listen to him, obey him, the hand of brute violence. He's my father, yes. And wasn't that her mother, running along the highway, sweating in the dust? Mama, Mama, Susanna shouted. If you don't come now, I'll be crushed under the wheels. I'm so ashamed, Mama. and the yellow and brown butterfly was fluttering. Wait, a woman shouted, wait, forget those videos. So much nastiness. Wait, Susanna, can't you see I'm coming to you? We'll leave. Enough of this house where my children are abused and persecuted. I can't take it anymore. I wanted to tell you sooner, but I've always felt such dread around him, that he would cut us off, deprive us of everything, you and your brothers and sisters. Yes, was that your mother on the horizon? She would come, Susanna thought, she would come. There were so many animals on the side of the highway, insignificant creatures, birds, rabbits, and squirrels of the flayed forest sacrificed. Susanna would slip into a coffin of fur and broken bones. She would, she thought, without anyone noticing, and under the blue sky, all the shame would fade. Who would remember her if her mother didn't come? I want to read that section in part because it seems to represent so much erasure and escape in the book, both for good and for ill. I'm thinking, for example, of May's friend who has an eating disorder and who's wasting away, or the various characters who can't be themselves in various circumstances, who either have to pretend in their job and just be, you know, still a trans person who's an engineer and so has to go to work in basically as with their necronym and not be able to live fully. And what you said about music earlier makes me think that sometimes escape can be a positive thing as well. And so I wonder how you see these moments of a lot of the characters who are erased or who are winnowed down are women. And so I'm wondering about, there's parts of the book that read almost as a feminist manifesto, a reclaiming of that space that women have ripped away from them. I'm not sure if that was part of the.
Yes. I was very moved by your reading. I think it's a little bit, if the mother would appear, she's safe, but the mother doesn't appear on time. That's what's so sad. And Susanna she went through too much of an humiliation with her father cutting her hair and showing it on TV. It is a real event, I saw that. And I felt, if I'm this little girl, what will I do? Will I survive this moment? And it is the question in the book, is she surviving or not?
Same thing with the young girl who's the suicide bomber who survives and who almost has this imaginary salvation with this man in his cart and his donkey who could take her away. Sometimes we don't know if things are real or not in those moments, if it's a sort of a hallucination that the character is having, if it's a wish that the writer who's writing that character is having in some cases, when Daniel is creating moments, these moments of hope that doesn't matter if they're real, I guess.
Well, his thoughts are very free. Huh? He's coming back at home at the evening, and he feels very free. He thought about the animals that he around him, the birds and the hens, and in the same time he sees it's a great humanity in peril. He feels that all is so dangerous for us, but he feels it through his happiness.
They never don't coexist. I mean, I think it was Daphne Marlett who spoke of the double edge of your writing, the beauty and the ugliness, always the two slices of the two sides of the same coin.
Yes, the happiness is very important. He thinks, I will be home soon, I will be writing, I will be happy, I will see my children, and at the same time it feels foreign. It feels foreign.
Many of these events. Sorry, there's some feedback. Is that me that's feeding back? Sorry, Deanna, do you want to, or somebody? I think someone's mic might be on.
I'm taking a look here. Excuse me.
I think okay. I don't hear the echo anymore. So maybe we're
okay.
Thank you. It wouldn't be a reading in 2021 without having some kind of right. I want to ask you. So you mentioned, for example, the character of Susanna, who was inspired by a real event. Of course the shootings in the Black Church. And then in the 10th novel, Une Réunion près de la mer, which is slated to be published by Nancy in 2023, which has not yet been translated into English. So that book talks about an event that looks an awful lot like the 2016 shootings in Orlando in the gay bar. These events happen, you know, outside your front door almost. You've been living in Florida for many years. And I wonder sometimes writers seem to move away in order to better write about the place they're from, right? So you want that distance and that vantage on your origins, on your roots, on your own community and your own society. Whereas in your case, you went away, you moved to the States many years ago, and you write about things that are happening right outside your front door. And so I wonder about the, I guess the intimacy of that, or I wonder if that lends a kind of urgency to your work, the fact that especially in Soifs, you've been writing about the United States and the wearing of that fiber of what makes America America in the late 20th and 21st century. And I wonder if there's a kind of urgency that that living among that lends to the writing for you.
Yes, there is a kind of urgency, a great urgency. But also, I think it's not only the situation of USA, it is a global situation. We have shooting everywhere. We have shooting in Montreal, in Quebec, and we have shooting in Australia, Finland. It is an age of violence. We were thinking that Roman Empire was an age of great violence. We are also an age of great violence, but we could manage it much better than they did, and we should.
Ideally, yeah, I know there must be some sense of relief in your community about the end of the Trump era, at least. And I wonder if you see things as being a bit more hopeful as well, kind of from the just au quotidien in the States these days. Not that any sort of
elles sont beaucoup plus. Nous avons beaucoup plus d'espoir maintenant avec un bon président, un homme honnête et une vice-présidente très très féministe et avancée. Non, nous avons beaucoup plus d'espoir. We are not the same, but we went through that, and it was so close to dictatorship that we should not forget what we went through. And the spectre, the shadow of it all is still there.
Hence the importance of bearing witness, either as a writer or as anybody else.
Yes.
I wonder if we should take maybe as we inch towards then the current moment. I wonder if we could take a few questions perhaps from the audience. Feel free. So as Rebecca mentioned, feel free to either raise your hand. I can't see all the raised hands and all the boxes of everyone, but I'm sure that I'll get a little gesture or a message from Deanna to that effect if someone is raising their hand, or just sort of wave your real hand around. There is a question, so from Claire Thorbs. I'll just read it out if that's okay, Claire. So she writes, can't wait to read both versions of the book. And she says, I'm very curious about the relationship between author and translator. Was there a collaboration process between the two of you? Do you want to, actually, I'd be curious to hear your process on working with Sheila on the first book, and you worked with countless other writers on your earlier books as well. And then with Nigel on the intervening books. And I can talk a little bit, or we can talk about how we worked on this one, but it was much more, my experience, we sort of, I went away and did the thing and then sent it to you and had a few questions.
Yes, we wrote to each other, but that's very important that we wrote to each other. And with other, you are a very remarkable translator, and so are my friends, Nigel Spencer and Carol Dunlop, who translated Death to the City, and Sheila Fishman. I have been very lucky, and now I have you. It's very amazing for a writer to find a good translator and to be so happy.
I think you've been lucky. And it was interesting, the continuation of trying to keep the threads that Sheila and Nigel had set down in terms of the names and the places and how the kind of the ethos of the book, and trying to create a new translation of Songs for Angel, but also trying to speak in that same lineage, if I can say, was really fascinating. Yeah. There's a couple of questions also. One interesting question that from from Sébastien Schulman, qui nous demande donc, merci beaucoup, thank you for this wonderful discussion. I'm a longtime reader and fan of Marie-Claire Blais' work, but new to Les Soifs. Is it possible to read the volumes in the series out of order, or certain volumes in isolation, or should one read them in order to get the full effect? What do you think about that? Do you recommend starting from scratch, starting from Soifs, starting from these festive nights and working your way through?
You could read any one, and then you would be plunged into these festive nights. Naturally, it's better if you read the whole complete series, but because you could follow the time, you could follow Augustino changing completely, Mother humanizing yourself. All the characters are moving. They are moving like we do, changing every day. But you could read one, and you would have an idea.
It puts me in mind of the last time you and I met in person. In fact, was right before the premiere at L'Espace Go of Soif Matériaux, which is a play that was put on by Denis Charlot, je pense son nom de famille. Marlot, pardon, excusez-moi. And at that point, there was an interesting conversation about how they had chosen to create characters out of this polyphony that you've built. And your answer was really interesting, and it helped me think through how I was going to separate the characters myself. And you talked about how the characters almost don't matter, because the question was who says what. In writing the play of these books, how do you decide what do you put in people's mouths? There's no dialogue in the book, so to speak. And sometimes it's clear, but sometimes who knows. And your answer, I thought, was very revealing, is that the characters don't matter, but the voices matter, essentially. And I thought that was a really interesting way to give agency to the issues and the voices and the people who are missing from this narrative, and the people who go missing, the people who die, the people we lose along the way. I thought that was a really beautiful way to pay tribute.
Denis Marlot and Stéphanie Jasmin knew how to reconcile all these people on a scenery with only 20 actors when there's 200 people in the books, and they did magnificently. But it's a new thing. It's a new song from the book. It puts them alive, and it's so important. That's why I thought it was so an important production, because it's not abstract anymore. You see Daniel, you see children, you see Melanie, you see everybody, you see the young man who was killed, you see them all. And that was, for me, very, very important, a little masterpiece that he did.
I would love to see a remount of that now theaters are reopening slowly. So I wonder if we'll get to see it again, perhaps touring. And it would be great to have you back up here in Quebec eventually as well. We have a question from Ilya. Ilya, I'm gonna just read your question from the chat, if that's okay. So they write, the epigraph to Soifs is a quote from The Waves by Virginia Woolf. And the books in the cycle also follow a certain kind of stream of consciousness with few punctuation marks. And in fact, I think this is one sentence, basically, the Songs for Angel. They ask, have you been inspired by Woolf's writing in some way for this cycle? And if so, how?
To read Virginia Woolf is very stimulating. It's very genuine, because it's rare that we have the work from the conscience point of view. And she has all her people talking from the inside, from the interior violence, or the interior, the sweetness or love, but it's very intimate. I thought it was so beautiful to read her and to follow this kind of songs of the sea. There is a song of the sea in these festive nights, but it's a sea always kind of troubled by refugees, by a lot of agitation, social agitation. And when she described the sea, we are almost on the second war, where she thought she would lose her husband and everything. And I think she died by the sea, and she died by this premonition that she will lose everything.
which is, I think, what gives the possibility of loss is well, especially the waves maybe, but even to the lighthouse or books, there's a certain kind of breathlessness or a rush not to get to the end of life, to finish with living, to experience everything, but a breathlessness to experience everything, I think. And there's that's definitely echoed, I think, in the Soifs series across the books.
Yes, particularly the young people, they want to live everything. I mean, in Soifs, but in life too. And we all went through that. But in the case of Virginia Woolf, in the same time, there is that fear to be alive. And at the same time, there is that fear of all the historic events coming through. And that's like Mrs. Dalloway loves life, but it's unbearable suddenly, the thoughts.
And getting them out makes the living more bearable, I think, in some ways as well. The
Yeah.
releasing the thoughts, for sure. A couple of really nice compliments from Linda Leith, who says, loving this conversation, and loving the fact that it's in English, given that you live in the US, but she's never heard you speak English. So such a pleasure to hear your thoughts. Marie-Claire, says Linda, thank you for being part of this. And then Diane Boulet, qui nous pose la question, or Diana, sorry, Diane Boulet, who asks, just wondering if it wouldn't be easier to always have the same translator. That probably would have been, there would have been some benefits to that probably, but since, I mean, Soifs was published in 1985, there's a lot of intervening years and things that happen, I suppose, in those years. I'm not sure if it would have been easier for you to have the same translator.
Yes, but it's fascinating to meet another one and another one. It's a new experience, human experience, and you're a kind of people. We are mostly all writers too, and you are very busy, and you have your own life. So that's very normal that we have to change.
And to see how many years have gone by. I would like to say, I wouldn't mind being Sheila Fishman, so that would be fine with me.
Very great.
Are there any other questions from, I'm scrolling through the chat to make sure I haven't missed anything, and I'm looking to see if there's any waving hands. So please make sure that if you do have a hand to wave, that you do so or raise it in the reaction. Sorry, I'm just being the brief technological moment to make sure we address everybody's questions. I think we've covered the few that are in there for now, so please feel free to raise your hand and ask questions if you have any forthcoming. I have a question perhaps for you as a younger writer. I look back at the beginnings of your career and I'm in awe of the path that you had. If we go all the way back to when you left Quebec, I think many writers would give their their right kidney or something to have had the experiences you've had. You left and you had you're almost mythological, and you worked with Edmund Wilson noticed your work and gave you a bit of a leg up. You had 2 Guggenheims, there was a Medici, and I wonder for a young writer at that time, because you were in your early 20s, what was that early attention like? What was that all of a sudden being kind of introduced to literary society at the time?
Well, don't forget I was a woman and young, and we were not exactly welcome. But there were some wonderful critics like Gilles Marcotte, Jean Lapointe, and Scott Simon in Toronto that I love very much. And which saved me, I think it's that there was translations not far. The translation came in, so I was able to be translated, and the books were in USA and everywhere.
And that was fairly immediate. I mean, I think every single one of your books has been translated.
Many books have been translated, yes.
There's an interesting question, actually, if we can go then from the very start of your career to the present day. Suzanne Langlois, je vais poser la question de votre part, si je peux, says, loving this conversation. Marie-Claire, can you talk a little bit about your new book, Un cœur habité de 1000 voix?
C'est un livre sur un vieux transsexuel qui raconte son combat sur le militantisme qu'il a traversé pour être lui-même. Il s'agit d'une personne de 92 ans à peu près, donc c'est très très dur d'avoir traversé toutes les batailles contre les transsexuels et contre les homosexuels, la bataille du sida en plus. Et il a tout vécu cela partout, à New York, à San Francisco. Il a vu ce qui se passait en Europe. Il a entendu les commentaires, il a vu les hôpitaux qui refusaient les sidéens. Il a tout vu ça, il a milité. Et nous le voyons à la fin de sa vie, qui retrouve tout un groupe de jeunes filles qui sont devenues plus grandes, elles ont maintenant 60 ans, là, mais qui elles-mêmes ont épousé son combat sans trop s'en rendre compte. Elles ont grandi dans le militantisme sans trop s'en rendre compte. Et elles trouvent leur libération en cet être-là.
J'ai l'impression parfois c'est un livre qui est aussi qui est hallucinant et qui sera probablement au Salon du Livre en présentiel la semaine prochaine si vous voulez vous déplacer. J'imagine au stand de Montréal, ils les auront tous. Donc j'invite à aussi aller l'acheter en présence. Pas de Marie-Claire Blais malheureusement, mais de toutes ses œuvres et de plein d'autres œuvres aussi et d'écrivains et d'écrivaines. Il y a le sens aussi, même dans Des chants pour Angel and in some of your other books, que les jeunes ont grandi avec un militantisme qui fait partie de leur conscience d'eux-mêmes, non seulement de la société, mais qui ont du mal à s'imaginer comme à l'extérieur de ce militantisme, de ce combat, malheureusement, des enfants qui doivent se battre pour avoir la planète qu'ils veulent, l'identité qu'ils veulent assumer, d'avoir le droit aussi d'être eux-mêmes. Et je me demande si les générations antérieures, on pense tous avoir tout découvert la première fois, bien sûr, sur l'amour ou le militantisme ou n'importe quoi. Mais je me demande si les générations antérieures avaient ce même sens d'indivisibilité avec le militantisme, si on avait l'impression à cette époque-là aussi qu'on devait se battre pour tout et qu'on n'avait pas le choix et que c'était même, ça faisait partie, la manif du samedi matin, je me demande si c'était aussi intégré à cette époque-là.
Mais il y avait à l'époque... on était contre le militantisme. Aujourd'hui, on le laisse libre, assez libre, comparé à ce que c'était. Je veux dire, bon, à New York, on a battu les transsexuels, on les a presque tués. Aujourd'hui, il y a des coins dans le monde, Nigeria, où on tue encore les homosexuels. Je veux dire, il faut arrêter ça, ça n'a plus de sens. Ce sont les derniers crimes tabous. Et c'est pour ça que j'ai écrit ce livre. J'étais vraiment nerveuse à la pensée des enfants qui n'avaient pas le choix et qui naissaient comme ils naissent, différents, et qui étaient menacés par le gouvernement de Trump. C'est comme ça que j'ai commencé à écrire le livre.
Un cœur habité de mille voix, vous voulez dire?
Oui. Oui, parce que je trouvais ça d'une gravité dans le crime, d'une monstruosité dans le choix du crime, de cruauté.
Et une des premières choses que Biden a fait, justement, c'était he rescinded those executive orders that had to do with limiting trans people's participation in various fields of the U.S. military, etc. So,
nous avons affaire à un homme très humain et humaniste. Nous avons beaucoup de chance. Mais il faudrait que ce soit dans le monde entier.
Et c'est loin d'être gagné, même aux États-Unis, je pense, à certains endroits aussi. Ça dépend aussi où on habite, je crois, dans quel...
Mais quand même, il y a une lutte qui se fait et qui est fertile.
Bien sûr. Une question aussi pour revenir à Soif. Elise, who asks, did you plan to write 10 volumes when you started the Soif series? That's a good question. Or did you think there would be 30, or do you think there would be one?
J'ai commencé par 3. Et je pensais que je m'arrêterais là. Mais il y avait tellement de choses à dire sur ce que je voyais autour de moi. Et c'était la grande période inspirante. Là. J'étais très inspirée par mes amis, par le côté paradisiaque du lieu où j'étais, qui était en même temps toujours très menacé. Et je ne pouvais plus m'arrêter. Et surtout, j'aimais l'idée de voir grandir les personnages avec une conscience qui change.
Vous voulez dire, you were a different writer, vous étiez une écrivaine différente en 95 ou même avec naissance de Rebecca ou l'ère des tourments que vous ne l'étiez en composant Angel dans ces cas-là.
Yes, I really want to continue their stories. The story of the social climate, the story of historic climate. Suddenly I was really so passionate by my by all these people that I could not stop. But I'm still fascinated by them.
Well, and in fact, I wanted to ask you about your another new novel that came out in 2020, which ostensibly is not part of the Soifs series, but it's called Petite Cendre ou la Capture. And Petit Cendre is one of the most, un des personnages les plus attachants, je trouve, de la série. He's absolutely compelling, and you want to kind of adopt him and hang out with him. And he wants, you want to be, he's the one you feel immediately closest to, I think, in part because his voice comes out very strong. And so I wonder why you chose to write a novel outside the series, but about a character from inside the Soifs series in Petite Cendre ou la Capture.
It could belong to the series if we want. Because other people from the series are there, like Robbie, Ian, many people, many characters, but they are new characters. There is a new couples, new study of new portraits, like the woman who is very distracted with her husband, and they try to love each other again very late in life, and which happens, and all kind of new stories are there. But the point is that Petit Cendre tried to save a man, and he does succeed. And that's very important for me because I saw it.
I wonder too about how your environment. So you lived in Florida for the better part of your writing career, and I wondered. That seems to be a particularly rife place. You live in the Florida Keys, and I wonder what that writing environment does for your production. I guess it's been fortuitous. It seems you're a little bit outside of the rush of things, but you're also living in this place that you've described fairly frequently as paradise.
It is paradise, but with vulnerable sides, with vulnerable people. And, since the pandemic, I saw no one, almost. And we could be isolated here. We could survive isolation. And it is the city of the past. I mean, it's a city where Elizabeth Bishop was the great poet. Tennessee Williams, many others, James Merrill, David Jackson, many writers were here and happy. They came here to be alone.
And now, paradoxically, you've been alone for a year and a half, or isolated for a year and a half.
With a few friendships, but it's the way it is. We all went through.
Do you think you'll write about the COVID pandemic? And I'm asking kind of stuff that, out of curiosity, not that it's the most defining, let's say, human narrative, but the human narratives within it are certainly interesting. Do you think it'll trickle out in the next few books?
Well, it certainly marked us. It certainly impressed us. It certainly showed our great quality and our great witness. I was so shocked by all the lack of consciousness in the beginning that we have here, that we had everywhere, in fact, not to want to take seriously deaths. And some people should not have died, and it's preoccupied. It's my conscience.
Well, we'll be looking to see how you bear witness to this moment and to those going forward in future books. There's also, I wonder if there's any other questions before we close up the evening. I'm looking to see Elise has addressed a question here. So about one of the common themes, Elise says, when we programmed the 3 events of this holiday book fair by ALEC, we looked back and saw that without realizing it, we had planned 3 events with 7 writers, all LGBTQ+. And Chris Dorado of the Violet Hour and Elise discussed whether this was maybe a moment in LGBTQ+ literary culture that it's, and in fact, I want to mention also that in Montreal in a couple of weeks, there's the first LGBTQ+ Salon du Livre that's going to be taking place. So I wonder if there's, and Elise wonders if there's a finally a maturing, that it's becoming established as part of the larger culture?
Well, people are more and more conscious that we are all not alike, that there are some different people on this earth, and they have to respect. We have to teach them when they are children how to respect everybody, and there is more a sense of the others that's developing with these movements, but also militantism, but also with writers, and also with freedom.
Yes.
With the sense of more freedom with time.
And ever more with every passing year, I would say.
Yeah.
I have one more question, if I may, from a surreptitious auditrice who doesn't want to come in and ask the question herself. Mais ma fille qui a 6 ans et 3/4 aimerait savoir, Marie-Claire, quelle est votre couleur préférée?
Vert.
Vert, ah bon, je le dirai. Parfait.
Et elle, quelle est sa couleur préférée?
Elle aime le vert et le bleu.
Le vert et le bleu, voilà.
Alors,
C'est
partagez ça.
l'espoir. C'est
J'ai dit que
l'espoir.
j'avais des questions à poser à une célèbre auteure, et puis elle m'a dit, est-ce que tu vas lui demander quelle est sa couleur préférée? Alors voilà. Eh bien, je pense que ça fait le tour.
Elle est adorable.
On a posé les grandes questions et on est passé aux questions aussi très fondamentales et très personnelles.
Oui.
Donc, je vais recéder la parole à Rebecca. Mais avant ça, je vais vous remercier très personnellement et du fond de mon cœur, tant pour votre générosité par rapport à Songs for Angel, mais aussi pour vos commentaires ce soir, pour ce partage et pour cette belle discussion. Je vais aussi, I also want to mention Nigel and Sheila, whose work on the Soifs series set the tone and set the pace and set the standard for, I hope what will become one of the great decalogies of the 20th, 21st centuries and beyond. So merci beaucoup, Marie-Claire. Merci à tous et à toutes. Et
Merci,
je vous repasse, Rebecca.
Félicitations encore.
Merci.
Oui, un grand merci à Marie-Claire et à Katia. Thank you both for a really wonderful discussion. It makes me want to read the entire series. And thanks to everyone who participated in a great Q&A. We have drawn a name, and it is Anna Derderian. I don't know if I pronounced your last name correctly, probably not. But thank you for participating, and to House of Anansi Véhicule Press, QC Fiction, and Paragraph Bookstore for contributing to this wonderful gift. So you'll get a copy of Songs for Angel and a number of other Quebec books translated into English. And if you could send Elise Moser your postal address, that would be great. You should be able to do that in the chat. Alors oui, vraiment merci encore à nos deux auteurs et à tout le monde à la maison qui ont été avec nous ce soir. If you don't already have a copy of the book, I think we'll put a link as to where you can find it in the chat. And as Katia mentioned, we will also be at Salon du Livre this upcoming week, du 25 novembre au 28 novembre, avec notre kiosque 1304 for a lot of great books, including Songs for Angel. So am I forgetting anything? Oh, and of course, unreadquebec.ca/books if you're looking for other, book ideas ahead of the holiday season, of course. Thank you so much. It was really a lovely, lovely evening with you all.
Merci, Rebecca.
Merci, Marie-Claire. Thanks, Katia.
Merci à vous deux.